Well, welcome everyone. It's great to have so many people signed up to this webinar about parishes and biodiversity and enabling you to bring nature back. My name is Rupert Masefield. I'm the Planning and Advocacy Manager at Suffolk Wildlife Trust. So I lead our very small team, me and one other person, who do all our engagement with the planning system and a lot of our advocacy for nature recovery across the county. And I've been with the Trust for just over 2 years now. And I'm going to deliver the first bit of the presentation for you and then hand over to my colleague Ella Warren Cooke from Norfolk Wildlife Trust, who is the Nature Recovery Advisor there. So just clicking through to the next slide, it looks like there's a bit of a delay. Here we go. So just to cover what we're going to be talking about this afternoon, I'll give you a bit of an introduction to Suffolk Wildlife Trust and how we engage with the planning system in Suffolk and why that's important for nature. Say a bit about ecology and biodiversity in planning and how the planning system takes ecology and biodiversity into account and hopefully protects and leaves it in a better state. A little bit about biodiversity net gain, which is the latest kind of big thing in planning and biodiversity, and then talk about the biodiversity duty, which is something that has been strengthened as a result of the Environment Act and introduces a new requirement for all public bodies to not only conserve biodiversity but enhance it. And I'll talk a bit about what that means for parish and town councils and what the opportunities are. And then the next section will talk a little bit more about the detail of how kind of parish and town councils can enhance biodiversity in local neighbourhoods and communities. And then finally, what your local wildlife trust can do to help. And at that point, I will hand over to Ella, who will give a little bit of a perspective from north of the border. So the first thing I want to do is just talk a little bit about the state of nature and why we need to see nature as a priority, why we're talking about nature recovery in the first place. So lots of you will be familiar with some of the figures on this slide, but they really drive home for me how important it is that we are thinking about how we protect and increase biodiversity through all the decisions that we make as individuals and groups on a day-to-day basis, but especially as councils at every level of local government, not only parish and town councils, but districts and county councils. So species in England have decreased in abundance on average by a third since 1970, which is a huge loss. So that's not extinction of species entirely, but it's just the abundance of those species, and that loss has been seen across not just England and the UK, but elsewhere in Europe and globally, and it's resulted in biodiversity loss and the crisis that biodiversity is facing being seen more and more on the same level as the climate crisis in terms of the threat that it poses, and that's resulted in kind of global action to halt and reverse biodiversity loss, and the UK government adopting targets to achieve that, including the 30 by 30 target to protect 30% of our land and seas in the UK for nature by 2030, and also to create and restore 500,000 hectares of wildlife habitat outside of the existing network of wildlife sites. And to give you an idea of what that looks like, 500,000 hectares is probably quite difficult to picture, but if Suffolk were to contribute its kind of proportionate share to that target, that would be 40,000 hectares of new habitat for wildlife across Suffolk, which is roughly kind of 10% of the area of the county. So we're talking about in order to halt and reverse the loss of nature that we've seen in the last 50 years, we're talking about significant action to increase the amount of land that is managed for nature. I just wanted to mention the Norfolk and Suffolk Natural Capital Evidence Compendium, which is a bit of a mouthful, but if you're interested in the state of nature in Norfolk and Suffolk, that's a really good resource to look at. And some of the things it tells us, so that, for example, more than 70% of land in Suffolk is in arable or horticultural production, and only 10% currently is managed with nature as the priority. So those are nature reserves, protected sites like triple SIs, county wildlife sites, local nature reserves. So in order to achieve what we need to, protecting 30% of our land and seas for nature and creating in Suffolk, potentially 40,000 hectares of new wildlife habitat, we're talking about at least doubling the area of land that's currently managed with nature as a priority. And there are also local targets. So Suffolk County Council aim to enhance 30% of council land for biodiversity by 2030. But what does that mean? What do we mean by nature recovery? I mean, this slide shows the Lawton principles. So back in 2010, a report was published by Sir John Lawton called Making Space for Nature. And it highlighted that the way we need to bring nature back is by creating more, bigger, better, and joined up habitats for wildlife. So this is a really key principle in terms of how you go about bringing nature back and where you should focus efforts to create and enhance and restore habitats. And Suffolk Wildlife Trust has also adopted its own kind of ambitions for nature recovery as part of our vision for creating a wilder Suffolk. So you can see the 30% of Suffolk's land and sea in recovery for nature target there, reflecting the national target, but also 1 in 4 people taking action for nature. And that is just as important as increasing the amount of land that's managed for nature. And that 1 in 4 target has come from social science that tells us if we can get 1 in 4 people taking action for nature, that's a tipping point. It's a critical mass of people where the 25% of people who are doing something actively to bring nature back influence the other 75%, and then we end up with everyone thinking about and making decisions that are positive for nature in their day-to-day lives. And most people think of the wildlife trusts and they think of the nature reserves that they manage, and this map shows some of the main nature reserves that Suffolk Wildlife Trust has across the county. But these make up a tiny proportion of the area of Suffolk. Less than 1% of the area of Suffolk is Suffolk Wildlife Trust nature reserve. So clearly we can't achieve this goal for bringing back nature on our own. And our work covers lots of areas beyond managing nature reserves, including supporting and providing advice to farmers and landowners on how they can manage their land better for nature, working in local communities and with councils and schools and businesses, and really encouraging and inspiring and supporting others to take action for nature, which is what we need to do to bring nature back. And in my team, in the planning and advocacy team, we're focusing on how the planning system, its policies, plans, strategies, but also the way development happens can better protect and contribute more to nature recovery. And we're really trying to make the best use of the limited resources we have to achieve that. So we're focusing on some of the areas where we can make the biggest difference, which includes defending county wildlife sites, which are really important non-statutory designation for sites that are important for wildlife at a regional or county level, and also providing input to neighbourhood plans and how those can build biodiversity ambitions and nature recovery into them. So, ecology and biodiversity in planning. The consideration of ecology and biodiversity in planning is derived from legislation and policies, including the Wildlife and Countryside Act, conservation of habitats and species regulations, and these other acts, and as well as national and local planning policy. And those effectively require development and planning to assess the likely impacts on wildlife and biodiversity and take steps to avoid impacts in the first place, reduce them as far as possible, and where they can't be eliminated entirely, to provide compensation for those. And I will just say that it's very rare that impacts on ecology and biodiversity alone are sufficient reason for development to be stopped entirely. So we're usually finding ourselves in a position where we're working to make things better. There are rare circumstances in which impacts on internationally important sites or species are a reason to prevent development from happening. So an example might be in the Brecks, which is a really important area for red-listed bird, the stone curlew, which does constrain development opportunities in that area. Another example playing out at the moment in Norfolk with the Western Link Road, which some people may be familiar with and heard of, which is proposing to go through a woodland that is home to, as far as we know, the UK's largest nesting roost of barbastelle bats. So there are circumstances in which impacts on biodiversity and ecology can be a reason for preventing development from happening, but it's very rare. And then finally, we've got the Environment Act that came into force in 2021, and that has actually strengthened and improved the protection for wildlife and biodiversity in planning, and also the requirement for decisions to leave nature and biodiversity in a better state as a result of development. And I've just highlighted in blue on that slide the other legislation and policies that have been amended as a result of the Environment Act. So planning is increasingly being used as a positive tool for protecting and restoring nature. And that brings me on to biodiversity net gain, which is a new mechanism that has been introduced by the Environment Act that sets out to leave nature and biodiversity in a better state after development has taken place. And it does that by attributing a value to the habitats that exist on a site before development happens, which can be measured, and any loss of those habitats calculated, and those habitats effectively have to be replaced through creation of new habitat or enhancement of habitat, so that the net value of those habitats for biodiversity is increased after the development has happened. And it also builds in the principle that you should avoid loss wherever possible as the first step. So national biodiversity net gain policy requires development to deliver a 10% net gain, measured using a metric that has been created by Natural England and DEFRA, with extensive consultation with ecologists and nature conservation organisations. But we don't think that's actually enough to support nature recovery, because 10% is actually sort of within the margin for error for most ecological studies. And it's only really enough to give us confidence that you wouldn't actually see a loss of biodiversity. And that's not the same as increasing it. So the wildlife trusts and other nature conservation organisations are advocating that minimum requirement for biodiversity net gain should be increased to 20%. And we've been working quite hard over the last year or two to encourage local councils to adopt more ambitious biodiversity net gain policies, including in local plans. Suffolk County Council, incidentally, have adopted a policy aimed to deliver 20% biodiversity net gain for their own housing programme. So that's housing that's developed by the County Council on their own estate. So biodiversity net gain is achieved by creating and enhancing habitats, and there's a requirement to manage those habitats and maintain their condition for at least 30 years. And thinking back to the slide that I showed previously of the Lawton principles, what biodiversity net gain habitat creation should do is improve ecological networks. It should help to expand, increase the size of, and connect existing habitats for wildlife. And it's additional to existing requirements for development to protect and enhance nature. So it shouldn't be a license for development to go in and trash what wildlife habitats there are already. And finally, it doesn't replace the need for things like bird and bat boxes, hedgehog highways. So those are things that we would still expect development to be including. One of the things that we and with the Save Our Suffolk Swifts group have been advocating for is the inclusion of swift nest bricks in all new developments, and with some success. So what's the opportunity for towns and parishes from biodiversity net gain? Lots of public bodies and landowners have been thinking about whether biodiversity net gain might provide an opportunity to fund habitat creation and enhancement on land that they own and manage through what's called off-site delivery. But realistically, there are going to be relatively few parish and town councils who are in a position to set up what's known as habitat banks and attract investment through biodiversity net gain, simply because of the very high cost of setting up a piece of land as a habitat bank to provide off-site biodiversity net gain. So really the greater opportunity is for parish councils and town councils to engage with planning and development that's taking place in their parish, in their town, to encourage developers to do biodiversity net gain in the best way and in the best places that are supporting your local priorities for biodiversity and nature. So, local councils and biodiversity, why protect and enhance biodiversity? There are so many reasons, and it's not just about reversing biodiversity declines, but promoting healthier ecosystems, all the benefits that biodiversity and nature bring, creating healthier, more attractive places for people to live. You know, we all want to live in places that have rich areas of natural habitat, places for wildlife, but increasing nature and doing things like kind of reconnecting floodplains, restoring rivers, creating habitats can help to protect us from the impacts of things like flooding that's increasing as a result of climate change. It's kind of very topical this year. And they can also help to increase carbon storage and sequestration and actually be mitigating climate change impacts. So many reasons for this to be a priority for councils to be thinking about. The biodiversity duty that has been introduced or strengthened, I should say, by the Environment Act. It's actually derived from the Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act, which dates back to 2006. And what the Environment Act does is add a requirement to enhance biodiversity as well as conserve it to that duty. And really, if I want you to take anything away from this afternoon, it's that this is an opportunity and shouldn't be seen as a burden on parish and town councils. The opportunity is that it gives the councils the ability to leverage more funding to deliver for biodiversity locally. So I think most parish and town councils already see biodiversity in nature. I hope they already see biodiversity in nature as a priority, and lots are already doing fantastic things to manage land for biodiversity and do things in the local community that benefit nature. And this kind of focus on asking public bodies to enhance biodiversity will open up opportunities for more funding. But there are some minimum requirements that local councils, town and parish councils will have to meet. And they're very low, really. So simply having biodiversity as an agenda item for a council meeting and making a note of what action is already being taken to enhance biodiversity, and then talking about, thinking about, and agreeing what more can be done. That's very simple and hopefully easy enough for all councils to do. So I would really encourage people not to be alarmed or about the amount of extra work that this might create for parish and town councils. It shouldn't do that. And finally, parish and town councils won't be audited and won't have to produce statutory progress reports in the same way that district councils will. So some of the things that local councils could be doing include looking at existing biodiversity strategies and plans. The local nature recovery strategy is something that people may have heard of, may be vaguely aware of, but this is something that for Norfolk and Suffolk, the county councils are leading on producing a local nature recovery strategy for each county, which we're expecting to be done by 2025. And this will sort of provide an overarching strategy for how and where and what we can be doing collectively to bring back nature. Engaging local wildlife groups is really key. There's a lot of existing knowledge and work being done in the community already to bring nature back. Auditing biodiversity and mapping what you've already got within your parish or town, writing a biodiversity action plan, building biodiversity into a neighbourhood plan if you have one, or adopting a biodiversity policy are all things that councils could be thinking about doing that will help them to plan and deliver more for biodiversity and increase nature. And Norfolk Association of Local Councils have actually produced a model biodiversity policy and action plan template that hopefully some of you will have seen already, and I'm sure that that will be available for people and can be circulated after this if people haven't received it. I will just say you don't need to have a neighbourhood plan to have a biodiversity policy or even a biodiversity action plan. These are things that you can do without a neighbourhood plan, and I know that not all parish and town councils do have a neighbourhood plan. In terms of the practical steps that can be taken to increase biodiversity, managing land for wildlife is obviously sort of crucial to increasing the space for nature and achieving that target. But equally important is raising awareness and supporting action for nature in the local community. I've included recording wildlife here because this is so important. Knowing what you've got is absolutely crucial for deciding what you need to do to look after it and increase it and enhance it. And it's also really important when it comes to engaging with planning with biodiversity in mind, because developers will look for biodiversity records at the local environmental record centre, which in Suffolk is Suffolk Biodiversity Information Service. So if you know that certain species are found in a certain place, it's really worthwhile reporting that to SBIS or NBIS in Norfolk through iRecord or iNaturalist. And then obviously engaging with planning to make it better for nature is another thing that parish and town councils are doing all the time. So local plans are absolutely crucial when it comes to how the planning system protects and enhances biodiversity, and it includes policies to protect and require development to increase nature. And I've already talked about our goal for getting local plans to adopt policies requiring 20% biodiversity net gain. But neighbourhood plans can be a very useful tool to help identify kind of priorities for biodiversity and opportunities to enhance and connect habitats within a local area. One of the tools that neighbourhood plans provides is the ability to designate local green spaces and protect these. There are some really good resources available to help with neighbourhood planning. Suffolk Wildlife Trust does offer support with building biodiversity objectives into neighbourhood plans, but there are also resources online. Neighbourhoodplanning.org is a really good one, and that's got a guide on making local green space designations in your plan. And I've included a link there to the Suffolk Biodiversity Information Service website as well, where you can look up what priority habitats and species are in Suffolk. And then also engaging with developers directly, responding to planning applications. I know this is something that a lot of people on the call will do already, but really good if you know what you want and can ask for it very clearly and influence what developers are doing for biodiversity and wildlife. So asking for things like swift bricks and bat boxes, native planting for wildlife, more nature-rich green space, but also seeing if you can secure contributions from development to doing things for biodiversity in the wider community and neighbourhood. So if you've got a biodiversity action plan or a map of where the opportunities are to enhance habitats for nature, you can ask developers to contribute to the cost of doing that. There's more advice on how to engage with planning for nature on our website, and I've included the link on the slide there. All these slides will be circulated around after the webinar, so don't worry if you can't jot everything down while I'm going through them. So land being managed for wildlife, as I said, is really important, and there are lots of places where town and parish councils can and in many cases are already doing this in public open spaces, local nature reserves and county wildlife sites. Lots of parishes own and manage county wildlife sites and also cemeteries, and there are lots of ways that you can manage those areas to make them better for nature. I've talked about the importance of engaging with local groups who are doing things and getting people involved and inspiring people to take action is really valuable, but also sort of supporting what's already happening. And there are some great things being done by community groups and parishes and town councils all over Suffolk. we're particularly focusing on supporting hedgehog-friendly villages and neighbourhoods as a priority at the moment. And if you are interested in getting advice on that, then I've put the contact for one of our community conservation advisors, Kathy Smith, on the slide there. So just a few examples of some of the things that are being done already. Felixstowe's Community Nature Reserve is a great initiative, and that seeks to encourage people to make space for nature in their own gardens in Felixstowe. There's a photo on the bottom right of the screen, I think, as I look at it, that shows a fence with a hedgehog hole in the bottom of the fence there. I think that's from East Bergholt, who have a hedgehog-friendly village initiative. I know that Debenham Green Team have started their own hedgehog-friendly village campaign, which we have been supporting. Kathy has been supporting. And there are lots of other examples that I don't have time to mention. Now, funding is often one of the big hurdles to being able to do more for wildlife and biodiversity, but I just wanted to highlight sort of some of the potential sources of funding for doing things for biodiversity locally. It's a long list. The top three on the list, I think, are related to planning. So you'll be aware of the Community Infrastructure Levy and Section 106. District level licensing is a specific kind of scheme that seeks to mitigate impacts of development on great crested newts and can fund pond creation and enhancement. But there are lots of other opportunities to secure funding. All the district councils in Suffolk, and I'm sure in Norfolk as well, do have information on their websites about local community funds that are available. And there are even government funds that are always popping up to support environmental delivery. Recently, there was an announcement of a thing called the Community Green Spaces Fund, which is certainly worth looking at. I think it's not yet open for applications, but it will be open soon, and it's going to be administered by Action with Communities in Rural England, ACRE, and offers grants of up to £75,000. So there is also advice available from the trusts on how to access grant funding for doing things for biodiversity. And Norfolk Wildlife Trust are running a course on the 9th of May up at Cly Marshes on that topic. So do get in touch with them if you're interested in attending that. Things Suffolk Wildlife Trust can do to help. We have a professional ecological consultancy that works across Suffolk and has done work for parishes and neighbourhood planning areas, doing biodiversity audits, biodiversity net gain assessments. We can advise and support with anyone working on a neighbourhood plan for how they can build biodiversity policies and objectives into their plans. And we provide advice on managing land for wildlife, including community green spaces, and subject to our capacity, because we only have 2 community conservation advisors covering the whole of Suffolk, but we do, as far as possible, try to offer free visits to sites where local communities, parish councils, town councils are looking to manage those sites for wildlife and nature, and help them identify how they can do that. And nearly finally, I just wanted to share a new series of community wildlife events and courses that we're running that are specifically designed and tailored to hopefully provide communities with the knowledge and some of the tools they need to be increasing biodiversity and nature in their local area. So you can visit our website to find more details and booking information on those. And then there are two courses I wanted to specifically mention. One of them about how you can build biodiversity into your neighbourhood plan that Suffolk Wildlife Trust are running later in the year in October, and another that Norfolk Wildlife Trust are running as a webinar on how to get the best outcomes for wildlife from planning decisions where you live, again in October. And then finally, the Wilder Together in Store Valley project is running an event on the 21st of May at Flatford Wildlife Garden, all about communities and parish and town councils and what they can do for wildlife. So that is the end of my bit, and I'm going to hand over to Ella now from Norfolk Wildlife Trust.
Hey everyone, my name's Ella Warren Cooke. I am the Nature Recovery Advisor at Norfolk Wildlife Trust. So I primarily support small private landowners, community groups, and increasingly parish councils. So I'll just give a quick overview of a Norfolk perspective. It's very similar to Suffolk, but there's a few subtle differences. So Norfolk has a unique and diverse landscape, and there are already many inspiring examples of local councils, community groups, and charities taking positive action for biodiversity. So we'll take a brief look at some of these shining examples and looking at a few local councils that are already doing really good things. So our first one is Sprowston Town Council. So they have been popping up quite a bit locally for their action for biodiversity. So they have been trialling rewilding verges along some of their residential streets and have been having quite a positive impact on the pollinator populations, and they've had quite good feedback from residents as well. They've also joined the network of mini forests being planted across the UK. So this was 400 trees being planted in the community on their recreation ground with the help of local residents to really kind of build that sense of ownership and to kind of ensure that it's taken care of for the future. They have also taken over ownership of Harrison's Wood, which is a plantation and semi-ancient woodland. So that is now open for the public, and they also do volunteer days where you can go and help with the management. So our second example is Brundall Parish Council. So they have an excellent publicly accessible county wildlife site called Creamer's Meadow, and they also have a biodiversity working group. So they hold regular open days to get residents and communities into that space and be part of that management and that decision making. And that also helps with wildlife discovery days. So that's opened up to families, and there's a bit less work style, but more educational style to bring in local residents. They have also been working very closely with the Tree Council. So Brundall has an excellent tree strategy, which has been noticed, and they've been nominated for several awards for their tree management across the borough. So linking up and knowledge exchange is really important. As Rupert said, local authorities can make big and small changes happen for biodiversity when they work together as an interconnected network. So there are often experts within the local community that can help with identifying important areas for biodiversity and recommend on appropriate management. So this could be ecologists who are residents, it could be enthusiasts, or it could be people who are on the forefront of taking community action for wildlife. Anyway, this could come in the form of a community group or one of these organisations that I've illustrated on the side. So we have Norfolk Wildlife Trust, Norfolk Rivers Trust, River Waveney Trust, Norfolk Ponds Project, Woodland Trust, and the Norfolk Biodiversity Partnership and CPRE. So all of these work across the county, and quite frequently we work with organisations south of the border as well. And like I said, there's a huge number of community and environmental groups, which I'll talk about a bit more on the next slide. But by working with these and creating an integrated network, we can help create well-managed green spaces and habitats that not only biodiversity can thrive in, but also community and residents can thrive in. And this biodiversity duty and putting biodiversity on the agenda not only helps us to celebrate, but it also helps us to safeguard and share the amazing wildlife and habitats we have on our doorstep. So here are a couple of our Norfolk groups. I say a couple, there's quite a few. This was a very short list from what I could have added. So just a few of them there. I won't go into them too much, but feel free to come back to this and have a look and see if any of these would be worth getting in touch with for when it comes to putting together biodiversity plans, because there is a whole host of knowledge in these groups, and almost everyone I've come across is very happy to share that. Again, this is some of the groups we have. So we have South Yare Wildlife Group, Elsham Swifts, Yarra Valley Conservation Group, Norfolk Ornithologist Society, Norfolk Flora Group and the Norfolk Fungus Study Group are very, very active, as is the Norfolk and Norwich Naturalist Society. We also have the Chet Valley Beelines Project, Gatewood Valley Conservation Group, Bergapton Conservation Trust, Norfolk Field Naturalists, and the list goes on. So in terms of what Norfolk Wildlife Trust can offer, there's a number of ways we can support local councils to support biodiversity, and this may be through any of the following. So we have neighbourhood plans, county wildlife sites, we have our Wilder Community Workshops programme, and we can also give specific habitat management advice for ponds, meadows, woodlands, and answer general queries on biodiversity and wildlife. So with our neighbourhood plans, this goes through our planning and advocacy department, which is a small section of our nature recovery team. So currently we respond to neighbourhood plans at various stages in the process to influence policies on the following: biodiversity and green corridors, local green spaces, water management, community actions to encourage wildlife, climate change and dark skies with respect to protecting wildlife. So we are currently developing some general useful guidance relating to environmental policies and best practice to enable us to help parish councils and those embarking on putting a neighbourhood plan together. This would most helpfully be used at an earlier stage in the process. So we also have our Wilder Community Workshops, and this is a collaboration of many different departments within the Trust pulling together our knowledge. So our 2024 programme has just been released, and it's been specially designed to support individuals, communities and groups taking action for nature in their local area. So we focused on 5 main areas for this. So we have group mechanics, which will cover topics such as community grants and raising your project profile in the media. As Rupert said, our community grants workshop is coming up next month. I think it's the 9th of May. That is a free webinar, I believe. So if you think it would be useful, please do come along. We also have habitat focus. So we look at managing, creating and restoring habitats such as ponds, meadows and woodlands. We have practical tool use, so workshops on developing skills in scything and hedge laying. We've still got lots of spaces on those tool courses, so please do come along to those as well. We have species focus, so we're looking at swifts and bees primarily at the moment. And we have community focus, so a chance to take a tour with community groups already doing great things for wildlife. We also have land and habitat management advice that we can give. So Norfolk Wildlife Trust can offer specific habitat land management advice to our nature recovery team, who provide support on land that falls outside of our nature reserves. So that is where my role sits. So we can respond to advice requests and provide visits for specific habitat management guidance to landowners, community groups and local councils and members of the public. And that is free at the moment currently. And it's usually myself or one of my colleagues that will go out and do those visits. We also have a county wildlife sites team. So they offer free management advice to owners and to managers of county wildlife sites, and can help arrange contractors, signpost funding and collaborate with volunteer groups. So they're currently in the process of surveying for new county wildlife site designations using our criteria. We also have a resurvey programme collating data on sites not monitored for over 20 years. So that's pretty much it from me. Norfolk Wildlife Trust can be contacted via reception or inquiries line. We always endeavour to respond quickly, but one of us will always get back to you. And yeah, if you want any advice regarding biodiversity, net gain, or just have an inquiry in general, we will do our best to support you in that. Thank you.